Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Good morning. Welcome to today's debate. The panellists we have before you today to lead the debate are Julia Evans, Vaughan Bernan, James Richie and Peter Bennett. Julia is Chief Executive of the National Federation of Builders, and they represent builders of all sizes, both in England and in Wales. And they have a strict health and safety culture at their heart. They work with the HSE and Cognac on various key themes, one of which is work at height, hence her attendance today. Vaughan is the chair of the Chartered Institute of Buildings Health and Safety Group. He previously held a position as Chief Executive of Shepherd's Construction. He was the chair of the Main Contractors Health and Safety Group. Has been very instrumental in CSCS and is now an independent consultant. James Richie is Head of Corporate Affairs for the Association of Project Safety and is also a Chartered Architect. He's heavily involved with the APS to improve the understanding and standards in health and safety, and he's sort of trying to lead the next generation of architects, I believe. Peter is the MD of PASMA. He's an executive director of the Ladder Association, and for his sins, he's also the chairman of the Access Industry Forum, who are hosting this debate today. Just a brief heads up on the debate, and we'll move on very quickly. Today's debate focuses on the fact that we've got a lot of regulations, standards and guidance and training in place, and we've got a lot of best practice, methodology and equipment provided by all of the AIF members out there. But we still have falls from height, and they still continue to present one of the biggest causes of injury and death in the workplace. So the discussion today will focus on where we're still falling short and what more we can do to reduce these statistics. We'll welcome questions today. If anybody wants to make a point or have a question, please raise your hand and we'll try and get a microphone to you. Okay, so really to start, we perhaps should touch on statistics, and a conversation I had with Vaughan this morning actually was quite interesting, so I'll turn to Vaughan now, and please could you start?
Yeah, good morning everybody. Hope you can hear me. I think the sound's atrocious myself, but in preparation for this, I did a quick check on the latest HSE stats, and falls from height count for over 50% of fatalities, and pretty much when you come to 3-day and majors, they count for well over a third, not really 40%. And it's quite interesting really, because I've been involved in health and safety for quite a long time, and my first induction to it was the famous John Prescott Summit. I'd just become the chief executive, and I got this invitation, so never want to turn anything down. I went to that, and that was when we had the fatalities hit over 100, and we had to do something different. We're now sort of well over half of that, but we appear to be riding the wave of the recession. And the fact the work's dropped, and we've got more people under pressure, the deaths have dropped, but I still believe that the sense of urgency should be the same. I represent 40,000 members, and we have a fantastic opportunity, but my institution, and it's being recorded, this is it, doesn't have health and safety as a priority, which is really, really weird. And we need to move things forward. The only way we can move things forward is get past the engineering and the processes and start to talk about behaviour. And then talking about behaviour on these ramshackle things we call projects, where you put a team together, and it's the first time and most probably the only time they'll ever work together. How do you change the behaviours on that situation? I have some ideas, but I'll let somebody else speak.
Peter, would you like to?
Yeah. Good morning, everyone. I would pick up on just the point that Vaughan made there, because this is an issue that we raised yesterday at the Holy Grail discussion, Well, one of the certainly important aspects that we think that we need to be exploring going forward is there are many training schemes related to the use of work at height equipment. The design and the safeguards which are built into work at height products are improving, have been improving. But the one aspect that we have yet to deal with is when we provide and supply high quality products with fall prevention and fall protection built in, and we train the people how to use them, still when they go out of the training centre and out into the big bad world and onto the projects, it appears that their behaviour is entirely different, and that's something that we really need to get a handle on. There is another aspect of that which I feel is important, and I think is important from all of the work at height industry organisations, and that is that our training and much of the information that we put out is aimed at the people at the sharp end, the people who use the equipment, and where we want to see considerable moves forward and considerable improvements is in the training and the competence of managers and supervisors in managing work at height activities. From our point of view, it's easy, or it's not easy, it's pretty much a given that the people that are using the equipment who are at risk of fall, you would want to make sure that they know what they're doing. But if they are involved in, and if they are regularly involved in bad practice, if you are a manager or a supervisor and you don't recognise that bad practice, then that seems like a bit of a pointless exercise putting them through the training. So we want to see some additional emphasis, particularly from organisations such as those along here, to get better training and better understanding and better competence in managing work at height activity amongst managers and supervisors.
Thank you. Yeah. Yep. Okay. Julia, I'm going to turn to you now, I'm afraid.
Yeah, no problem. Can you hear me? No, can you hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes, there we are. I work for the National Federation of Builders, and we have builders in membership who are little tiny guys that might do your kitchen and bathroom, right through to billion-pound turnover companies, so the whole range is in there. But for us, interestingly, reflecting what Vaughan was saying, for us, health and safety is absolutely the top priority, and we expect that to be the same for our members too. We're very concerned about the statistics about accidents from people falling from height. Just as a slight aside, I was at Plant Works just up the road from here earlier on this week, and looking at the massive equipment that they have there. And one of the concerns being expressed there, and this is part of the overall procurement environment that I think people are working in, is the sense because people are really grinding down on any degree of profit and indeed going for suicide bidding, bidding actually under cost, they're making compromises on health and safety that they wouldn't do otherwise. The issues there is that even for a small job, if you need to hire a cherry picker, you need to hire a cherry picker. Ladders will not do it. So the important thing, I think, for small builders, small and large, is to make sure that they're trained, as Peter said, that they've got the equipment that they need to do these kinds of jobs, and they understand what the risks and all the rest of it are. I would also certainly emphasise the importance of the client in here, that they don't look automatically for the cheapest price, that it is important, and indeed they have responsibility to ensure that the job is run in a safe way. So just to go for cheapest price is not actually going to deliver the quality that you actually might want. So I think there's a big issue there. I'm sure we'll get on to talking about the Health and Safety Executive before too long. And as a trade fed, we're involved in Cognac, which is the bit of the Health and Safety Exec that deals with the construction industry, especially the smaller businesses in the construction industry, some of whom actually are very large. The issues for them are very much focused on making the industry a safe and healthy place to work. And working at height is key in that. The message that I would give to them is that we don't need any more laws, we don't need any more regulations. What would be very helpful is to have more advice and guidance tailored around very specific issues. Fragile roofs is one that's been very much mentioned to me, but there's lots of others as well. But lots of advice and guidance tailored to specific contexts within the industry that are going to be helpful to builders. and designed in such a way that it's not reams and reams and reams of tight little text, that it's in bite-sized chunks that, you know, people like me, people in the business can actually understand and use. And I think in that way we'll get a more incremental improvement to safety on site. So there's a few things in there to think about.
Thank you. Yeah, that's an interesting point. A point that I will make is that we've actually had quite a lot of discussion with the Health and Safety Executive within Facet about fragile roofs and about overnetting of roofs. In fact, we have somebody here today that's
excellent.
That's been involved with that. So
hope we get some questions.
It's nice to hear that that's something that we're doing right. So, James, can I ask you to?
Yeah, thank you, Tony.
Thank you.
I was just going to say, I think everybody realises that the HSE's biggest problem is with the smaller end of the market in terms of accidents and incidents, and particularly, you know, falls from height and so on. I think there's also a role here, not just for the contractors to up their game at that end of the market and not bid quite so competitively, I'll call it that rather than suicide, but yes, you know, obviously putting in silly prices, that means they can't afford to use the right equipment. But also I think there's a role here for responsible professionals in the construction industry, such as architects, for example, who are visiting site and they see people going up a ladder and working up a ladder, for example, for not just to go and do one little 5-minute bit of work or 15-minute bit of work, but actually working off ladders, for example, for a whole day and so on, and they do nothing about it. They say nothing about it. And there's a big education role there, I think, for designers to actually understand better, if you like, the dangers of working at height by not using the right equipment and making sure that people are trained, and not being afraid to actually speak up and say, sorry, mate, but that is unacceptable. You can't do that. You must stop work, because in reality it's the architect on those sorts of projects that is the contract administrator who has the power to actually stop the job and say, you cannot continue until you get the right bit of kit in to do that. And I think there's an education process to be had there with the design end, if you like, the front end of construction industry that will support all of the good work that's been going on in improvements in equipment. And you know, we all agree, I think, that the equipment is there technologically and everything. There's no excuse. So, you know, we need everybody to come together and push in the right direction here.
Thank you. Yeah. Okay. Just sort of moving forward a little bit, we've had some debate about we focus on falling people, we focus on saving people's lives, but there are issues where people are working at height and may have problems where they have falling objects and falling materials and so on. And personally, from a Facet point of view, I'm aware of people having issues with roofing materials knocking roofers off the building into nets. But we don't spend a lot of time looking at that side of it, in my opinion. And I'd like to ask Peter, really, what he thinks we can do to move that forward.
Thank you very much. And thank you very much for raising that point, because it is quite appropriate in terms of the title of this panel, Mind the Gap, where do we still need to focus. Certainly from our organisation's point of view, we tend to focus on the issue of falls from height involving people. And I have to say, from a personal point of view, I don't tend to think an awful lot about falls from height involving objects. But fairly recently, we have been in contact with an organisation who are very active in the oil and gas industry, an organisation called DROPS, which stands for Dropped Object Prevention Scheme. This organisation has done some really tremendous work in the offshore oil and gas industry, dealing with this issue of falling objects. Again, from our perspective, it's not always immediately apparent that this is a big issue, but it was brought, I think, to my attention again maybe a couple of months ago by one of my colleagues who was saying that they had some substantial issues, particularly in the big cities where you have very high buildings, and a nut that size falling from 200 feet by the time it hits the ground is going to do some serious damage. I think there's an opportunity for Access Industry Forum and perhaps other organisations to engage with and to collaborate with this DROPS organisation, who seem quite keen to put their information, put their guidance into other sectors. And they've got some really quite clever stuff. They've produced some, pocket-sized cards that give you a green, amber, red indication for a weight of something from a height. What is the likely consequence going to be? So, yeah, I think it's something that we need to be addressing, and we probably should have addressed it before now.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay. I'm looking Julia smiling. Would you like to say something?
I always smile.
Would you like to say something?
I think just to emphasise what Peter's been saying, I think, yeah, so I was about to say we're all of an age in here. So if I say O levels, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
you all know what I mean. It sounded like it sounds like an O-level physics question, doesn't it? You know, if you drop an object weighing so much from a height of X, some of you will know the equation. Yes, I can see nods in here. There is a formula actually for working out what the weight of it when it actually hits the ground. And I think that's really incredibly important, and is so casual usually about stuff at height, never mind people at height. So I think there is a big issue there, and of course if it hits somebody, that's the end of them. I think the key thing that Peter's saying here, though, is there is the knowledge and expertise out there in the industry. And it's a case of getting it shared, really, isn't it? And getting it out there so that everybody can benefit from it. So it's not a case of keeping stuff to yourself, actually sharing it and making sure that trade feds and other interested parties like the CioB actually share information and get it out into the construction industry.
I should just say, Tony, out in the Access Industry Forum pods out there, we do have some copies of these. This is what they call a DROPS calculator.
Ah, there we are, yeah, O-levels.
DROPS calculator. And you can see there it's a red, amber, green. The red essentially means if an object of that weight falls from that distance, it's likely to result in a fatality. And you can show that, see that in there.
That's useful stuff.
Thank you. Yeah, okay. One thing that I'd like to ask the two gentlemen on the end, and I'll start with Vaughan, if I may. Statistics-wise, we record quite a lot, and we had a conversation this morning reference falls into net from my perspective with Facet, but obviously it goes wider ranging than that. What more can we do with that? How can we achieve better information, more full information?
Well, sadly, there's no quick fix to this. My experience at Shepherd was that we installed a behavioural safety campaign, and we actually made behaviour a process. Because I'm impressed with any campaign that has an acronym, but it's usually dependent on the successive poster. We're annually obsessed with posters. We think if we put posters up on sites, people will read the bloody things, or even go to the little pile of handouts. It doesn't really work. What we respond to is what you're responding to now, hopefully by listening to me. We respond to people. So our behavioural safety system was called culture-based safety, and touching on what James said, sadly the architects don't go to site nearly enough, so we can't have any system based on the architects intervening. It's about the people who run the sites. That's our project managers, our building managers, our assistant site managers, and they have to, surprise, surprise, shock, horror, talk to the bloody workforce, right? And that is something they don't do enough of. They need to talk to the people out there. Remember, it's not people in this room that are going to come to any harm. It's the people out there on the site. They're the people that get hurt. And so you have to talk to them. You have to make them aware that they need to talk to each other. They need to pull their colleagues back from the edge. And I do mean from the edge, because the number of people we have working in the industry today, of the variety of nationalities we do have people doing things that they shouldn't be doing. And if we don't pull them back from the edge altogether, they'll fall over it and become another statistic. So I believe that the industry as a whole, leadership from the top, should start to install behavioural safety campaigns in all of their businesses, and especially when you come to this this team that you put together. That's the way you're going to make a substantial shift. The architects are in as well. They're not out, they're in. Yeah. But they're not the key people.
James?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting, absolutely on the nail. I mean, you know, site inductions, toolbox talks, all the things that you need to refresh people's memories, you know, before they start work each day, each week, or whatever it is, before they do a particular job. Let's get in there and obviously get the right information to them so that they feel confident in what they're doing and they've been adequately instructed on what to do. I mean, I know you mentioned architects, but it's something that I was involved with, an HSE report into tertiary education of architects. And I know, Tony, you mentioned that I was trying to breed a new generation of architects or something. But the point was that came out of that report was that when I was in School of Architecture, I was attached to a practice, a very good practice in the northeast of England, and I used to go and visit them, and I would look at the drawings, and I'd go out on site with them, and I would see how the drawings had been converted into what was actually being built. And the nub of it was that there is not enough construction knowledge amongst designers, as simple as that. Resident engineers do not occur very rarely do you get resident engineers, except perhaps on very large projects or civil projects and so on. And they used to be an integral part of a construction project. And there was somebody there who was on site, and they understood that link between what was being designed and drawn and what was actually being built. And I think, you know, the new British standard 8560 for designing, for work at height, if I can shorten it to that, is a good step forward. Unfortunately, I see that only really coming into effect with the larger practices who perhaps are signed up to Barber or TI or one of these systems where they get access to British standards free, because the cost of British standards are horrendously expensive, and the small practice, the 1 to 5 person practices or whatever, are not going to be shelling out 150 quid for every single British standard that they need to be able to read and understand. So getting good advice and free advice and guidance with regard to how to design the building in the first place to stop the need to have people up at height unnecessarily. We're never going to stop people having to work at height in some way or other, but if we can do it in such a way that we design buildings to avoid that unnecessary working at height, then that will help chip away at this problem that we have in the industry.
Thank you. Yes. I'd like to throw it open to the floor if anybody has any questions that they'd like to ask or any points they'd like to make. Thank you.
Thank you. Can you hear me? Yeah?
Just.
I've got 2 points to make, really. The first one is really about the statistics, as you say. Obviously, over 50% of the fatal accidents are falls from height, but a vast proportion of those are on sites that are non-notifiable, don't come under CDM. So, although we can have a trickle down on those sites, my question really is, how do we reach those difficult groups where they're never exposed to a site that's a CDM site? They don't have that contracts manager doing the toolbox talk. We really struggle, I think, to reach that demographic, because effectively they're a trade. They go, they do the job, they come away, and they're not exposed to any health and safety advice, guidance, or anything else from a major contractor. And my second point really was about the legislation and regulations that we have. Obviously, within HSE, we've gone through a process of deregulation. We're trying to reduce the amount of regulations. The way we tend to work now is that we expect the trade associations to write guidance for their members, sometimes with HSE input and sometimes with joint badging. But certainly if there's a gap there and guidance needs to be written, maybe it's for the trade associations to at least try and identify that and then approach us and see if we can work together. Because we can't always identify where the gaps are, but the trade associations can.
Thank you, Julia. Julia is from the HSE.
Justine.
Sorry, Justine. Yes, sorry, Julia's here. Julia, I'd like to turn to you.
Those are two great questions. The hard-to-reach group, it's interesting, we were having this conversation before we started about the very small businesses that are hard to reach. I mean, what I would say, of course, is join a trade fed, and then they won't be hard to reach because they'll all be a part of the National Federation of Builders or whatever. So trade feds, I think, are really important in this. They are desperately difficult to get to, and I don't think there's any easy answer here. You just have to keep on keeping on, and there's a real responsibility, and this is a conversation I have with the members of the NFB, is that whoever you are and whatever you're doing, if you've got anything that looks like a supply chain, talk to them, get them involved in what you're doing so that your supply chain people are also included in the wider ambit of the benefits that being a member of a trade fed can bring. So I think there's some help there. Moving on to your question about trade feds getting involved in the HSE, I'd absolutely agree with you there. I think the partnerships between the HSE and trade federations are very potent because you've got expertise and practical application wedded as one when they work together. We the NFB, have just done a piece on asbestosis and mesothelioma, which I know is not the subject of this discussion, but if anybody's interested, I've got some copies of the report with me, and there's some really interesting work in there. And we're about to partner, the NFB's about to partner with the HSE on diesel and the exposure to diesel. So I think there's a real rich vein there waiting to be tapped. As to, in summary, small companies, it's always going to be a problem. We just have to keep on keeping on. Partnerships between the HSE and trade feds are absolutely superb, and I'd really encourage trade feds and their members to get involved in those.
Very briefly, I think James wanted to raise a point.
I just wanted to make the point that, of course, in order to practice as an architect or an engineer, you have to be registered with them. There is no mandatory requirement to be a member of NFB. It would be wonderful if there was.
Oh, wouldn't that be wonderful? Not like in Europe.
Or my lads say FMB or whatever.
No, you're not.
But the simple solution is one which will put a cat amongst the pigeons, which will not be liked, which is licensing contractors as a way of doing it. But architects are licensed, dentists are licensed, doctors are licensed, lawyers are licensed. It's a consumer protection issue as well. Is the person that's paying the money to have the job done actually getting what they deserve in terms of not just health and safety, but value for money and consumer protection? And yeah, it's not the right one, but and we are, as you know, very happy to partner with HSE on anything to do with the CDM regulations and so on. I think maybe the change in the regulations that is likely to be coming up very shortly may bring a little bit more exposure of health and safety via a regulatory route to some of the smaller projects that are around. But at the end of the day, that is just a legal, duty. It's the actual getting the health and safety practices done that is the key thing. And how do you do that? It's an education thing, and I come back to my point is most of those small jobs usually have a designer involved very often. If we can get the designers to take responsibility for making sure that the contractors are doing it properly, then maybe we've got a better chance.
You make two good points, and they expose a lot of the myths of yesteryear that the HSE can in fact prevent accidents by inspection. The HSE couldn't stop a pig in a passage, right? You only see them when something's gone wrong, right? So you've got to get to the lowest common denominator. That's why I say my organisation, CioB, has got a lot of individuals. James has been talking about architects a lot. 80% of all architects are one-man businesses, like herding cats. But at least they've got the RIBA that supports them, because without that they can't trade as an architect. A lot of the people you talk about who are running, and I find it still very hard to believe that the non-notifiable, more like non-notified, but those accidents are coming from those things. They're usually run by one person. And CioB, part of the work that we're doing is we're doing a code of practice for SMEs. And so that we can give that to our members and say, there it is. Trade associations, by the way, and I was with MCG for a long time, it's very, very difficult. You've got an outreach we had about 30 members at one stage, but it's not an outreach to the individual person. When you come to the small projects, it's the one person. And again, I would say James is talking about architects. Unfortunately, it's actually managers, project managers, who actually are there every day, and they're the people that have got to sort it out.
Thank you very much. I'm sorry, as these things always do, they run out of time and we're going to have to move on. I know there were more questions in the audience, I'm afraid. We can't go to those now. But the panellists will be around outside for a few minutes afterwards, so if you want to go and address your questions directly, please do. I'd like to thank everybody for their input today and their time. It's very much appreciated from our point of view. And thank you for attending. Thank you.